There was a young woman who had just started a new job in a large office building. She was walking to work one day when a long black hearse drove up slowly next to her, matching her pace. This made her very nervous, and she anxiously watched it out of the corner of her eye. The driver leaned out the window and called to her in a deep, booming voice, "Do you need a lift?" She turned to look at him and got a terrible shock. The driver's face was incredibly hideous and deformed. His skin was a deathly pale, and one of his eyes was noticeably higher than the other. The man pointed to the rear of the vehicle, which contained a coffin. "Room for one more," he said. Frightened by his bizarre appearance and unwelcome suggestion, she refused his offer of a lift. Profoundly disturbed, the woman ran down the street until she came to the office building where she worked. For the rest of the day, she couldn't stop thinking about the strange man in the hearse and was glad when the workday was finally over. The woman worked up on the 9th floor, and when the elevator came, it was almost completely full. She hesitated for a moment before stepping in. "Are you sure you don't want to come in?" asked a familiar booming voice. "There's room for one more." The woman gasped. It was the hearse driver from this morning, eyeing her with his lopsided, horrible gaze. Now thoroughly spooked, the woman backed away, stuttering, I think I'll take the stairs." The hearse driver just stared at her as the doors slid closed. The woman had only taken a few steps down the stairs when she heard a chorus of screams following by a deafening crash. She hurried downstairs and discovered the elevator cable had broken and all the passengers aboard had plunged to a grisly death. I am a musician and I mostly compose ambient music. I had an idea for a new project. I was going to record the sound of myself sleeping and then set it to music. At the time, I lived alone in a remote area. That night, I set up all my microphones and equipment around my bed. I fell asleep around midnight with the tape running. The next day, when I reviewed the recording, I heard something that left me completely horrified. At exactly 3 hours and 24 minutes into the recording, I heard the sound of my bedroom door opening. I said goodnight to my wife laying next to me. I rolled over and saw her standing in the doorway. Ever since I was 15 or 16, I have been having a recurring nightmare. Every month, I have the same horrible dream again and again. In the nightmare, I find myself alone in an abandoned building. I am standing in a dimly lit hallway when all of a sudden I hear very distant sounds. Thud, thud, thud. The violent blows echo throughout the building. Then, the noise begins to get closer, creeping towards me down the long and gloomy corridor. That's when the terror grips me and I turn to start running back down the hallway, searching desperately for a place to hide. I run until I reach a door at the end of the hallway, and there is nowhere else to go. I open the door and find an unfinished bathroom. Closing the door behind me, I crouch in the corner and listen to the sound of the violent blows drawing ever closer. Thud, thud, thud. Finally, the noises reach the bathroom and heavy blows rain down on the bathroom door where I am hiding. The door trembles with every blow, and I bury my head between my legs, hoping it'll end. The sound of the blows become louder and stronger. Just when the door seems as if it is about to give in, I wake up in my own bed, shaking and sweating. Every day after I have this nightmare, I can't shake the feeling that I'm being watched. It is as if someone or something is watching me and watching everything I do at every moment of every day. Sometimes, out of the corner of my eye, I catch a glimpse of a girl. I have seen her when I was in class at school, walking down the street, or just hanging out with friends. As soon as I notice her, she seems to disappear into thin air. She seems to be a girl around my age, and she is always dressed in gray. Whenever I spotted her, I only caught a brief glimpse, but afterwards, I could not stop shaking. It was 3 months ago when I flipped through the newspaper that I read the horrible news about the murders. It seems that an entire family in my city had been brutally killed. The father, mother, and the 2 teenage daughters were beaten to death in their own apartment, and the 3rd girl was missing. There were some black and white photos of the crime scene. The photos were taken in the family's living room, and it was completely destroyed. The table lay in pieces, the curtains were torn, and the mirror was broken. The carpet was covered in splinters and pieces of shattered glass, and there were pools of blood all over the floor. But that's not what caught my attention and caused me to break out into a cold sweat and made me shiver uncontrollably. It was one of the other photos, the photo of the missing daughter. I recognized her immediately. It was the girl in gray. I was sure it was the same girl I had caught fleeting glimpses out of the corner of my eye. Although I had only seen her from afar, I was sure it was her. That night, I was terrified of going to sleep. I was afraid of what I might dream. I tried desperately to stay awake, drinking endless cups of coffee and glasses of cola, but it was no use. Eventually, I fell asleep and had the nightmare again. In the dream, I found myself back in the dingy, abandoned building, and again I heard the noises. The nightmare was the same as it always had been, except for one thing. This time I didn't wake up when the door finally gave in to the strong blows. Instead, I heard the door cracking and I felt the splinters fall on me. Then I looked up and saw what was standing there. It was the girl in gray. Her hair was long, her skin was pale, and she was barefoot. When I finally saw her face, it left me petrified. Her face was almost the same as mine. It was like looking in a mirror. She stood there before me, staring at me with a sinister smile on her face. In one hand she had a bloody iron bar. I was paralyzed by fear and couldn't move. At the moment I realized I was completely naked. That's when the girl came rushing towards me. She jumped on me, but she never landed on me. Instead, she seemed to go right through me. It was as if she had somehow jumped into me. When I woke up, I was terrified, pale and sweating. I had the strangest feeling inside. It felt like there was something moving about inside my body. Since then, I have not seen the girl in gray. A few weeks later, I discovered I was pregnant. I'm not married, and I've never had a boyfriend, so how can I be pregnant? It's impossible. And yet, there's a baby growing inside of me. The doctor told me it is a girl. I'm very scared of what might happen. What am I giving birth to? A baby or a demon? If anyone has any idea what's happened to me, or if someone had the same experience, please tell me about it. I'm really scared. Hello. What you're about to read will shock you. I need to confess the strange and terrible crime I have committed, and I can't bear to keep my secret any longer. I beg you not to stop listening. For years, I have hidden myself away from the world. You see, I'm hideously ugly, too ugly to describe. You would be shocked and horrified at the sight of my face. I was a miserable and wretched creature because I never knew love. I never felt the affectionate touch of a hand or the warm feeling of a pair of lips brushing against mine. I was a carpenter by trade, and I worked all day in a factory making furniture. My specialty is making chairs. My skilled hands carved the wood, screwed the pieces together, fashioned the backrests and armrests, and did the upholstery, patting the cushions and sewing the covers. As I worked, I felt like an artist creating a great masterpiece. When my chairs were finished, I would always test them out to make sure they were comfortable. It gave me great thrill to imagine all the different people who would sit on the chair I created. Unlike me, they had wonderful, happy lives. They had someone they loved and who would love them back. Every time I thought of them, I felt nothing but misery and despair. One day, when I was designing a new type of chair, and as I worked, a very strange idea began to take over in my mind. I changed the design and made a hollowed space inside. It was a cavity large enough to fit a human body. Of course, I had to take out a lot of the wooden framework and the springs inside. The knees would just be below the seat, and the head and the upper body would be inside the backrest. Someone could sit inside the chair and no one would ever know they were there. I left a small space for supplies like food and drinks, and I even included a little potty for, those times where you have to go to the bathroom. By the time I was finished, the chair had become a miniature home. I stripped off my clothes and I climbed inside the chair. Can you imagine how strange that felt? It was a tight fit, but I managed to get used to it after a while. I was in complete darkness, but I can hear what was going on around me. I heard my colleagues walking around the factory looking for me. They had no idea that I was right under their noses. After a while, some delivery men loaded me up on a truck and transported me to a furniture store. They put me on display in the middle of the shop floor and left me there. I was perfectly concealed and nobody was any the wiser. I was like a crab or a turtle, but instead of a shell, I had my chair. As soon as I arrived, customers started testing out the chair. I can't tell you how many unknown bottoms sat down on me. Some of them had big fat bottoms like jellyfish, and the others had thin bony ones like a skeleton. Some were firm, and others had chubby ones, bouncing up and down on me like a rubber ball. It was an amazing feeling. I could feel the warmth of their flesh through the material. Their shoulders rested against my chest and their arms and hands rested on mine. Not one of them suspected that the soft cushion they were sitting on was actually little old me. Previously, because of my grotesque and disturbing appearance, people had always recoiled at the sight of me. But now my skin was virtually touching theirs through a thin layer of cloth. Hidden inside the chair, I imagined myself hugging them and wrapping my arms around them in a passionate embrace. Of course, it was a strange sort of existence. After spending so long inside the chair, sitting in the same position, my muscles started to wither away. I could barely move and my body was crooked and bent. I was folded up like a contortionist, but I didn't care. All I could think about was the exquisite feeling of having people sit on me. One day, somebody bought my chair. The delivery man picked me up, put me in the back of a van, and brought me to the home of a nice family. They put me in their living room facing the TV. Within days, every member of the family had sat on me at least once. I was in heaven. But there was one member of the family I loved more than all the others. This person was very special to me, and as time went on, I began to fall in love with them. I couldn't help myself. Whenever they sat down on me, I tried to make my knees as comfortable as possible for them. Whenever they leaned back on me, I would embrace them more warmly and make them nice and snug. When they felt tired, I would move my knees back and forth, gently rocking them to sleep. You may think I was mad, but I was madly in love with this person. I became obsessed with them, and I longed for them to return my feelings. I reached the point where I felt that if they knew I was there, they would fall in love with me too. The person loved to read, so I came up with a cunning plan. I wrote my own story and submitted it to a website they frequent. By now, you've probably guessed who I'm talking about. That's right, it's you. I've been in your home for so long, you've probably forgotten where I came from. Every night I crawl out of the chair and sneak upstairs to watch you sleep. I can't bear to be away from you for a moment. I love you, and I think you could love me too, if only you saw me. Now, after you finish listening to this, please turn around and look at me. I'll be waiting. Don't be afraid. Come and sit down on my knees. I miss your touch. I tried to check my makeup in the mirror, but my reflection was missing.